Ladies, gentlemen, and vault hunters of all ages, with more and more people flooding into the endgame for Borderlands 4, people want to make their proper big boy builds, or big girl builds, depending on your vault hunter. The builds that can one-shot the hardest things in the game, or at least kill it in a handful of seconds. And while your skill points and specialization points are going to be pretty straightforward, experience means levels, levels means points, but the perfect set of equipment specifically takes a bit more effort and time, but does get significantly easier the more knowledge you have about how it all works. So today we're going to go in detail about equipment farming, talk about the basics to make it easier in general, some surprising things that you may not know about, and some specific methods depending on what you are after in order to help you try and maximize the speed at which you can farm up the items you want to enter the build you want to use. First up then, let's talk about how and where you should farm. If you don't know this by now, you probably should, but the vast majority of legendary items in Borderlands 4 are not fully random where they drop from. Every legendary can drop from pretty much anywhere at a relatively low rate, referred to as a world drop, and some legendaries are only world drops, like all of the legendary enhancements, for example, are world drops, meaning there is no way to directly target farm them, but the majority of legendaries in the game are what are called dedicated drops. Dedicated drop legendaries can still drop at world drops. That means that they do have a very low random chance of dropping anywhere, but they have a much higher chance of dropping from one specific target. There are multiple lists for this type of stuff floating around the internet already, so if you know the name of the legendary that you want, you can search the name and dedicated drop, and you will get your answer very quickly. Dedicated drops seem to not have a specific set rate. Some bosses and some legendaries do vary a little bit, but this user on Reddit did 1,000 kills on Splash Zone as a test on Ultimate Vault Hunter 5 difficulty. He found over the course of 1,000 kills an average drop rate of around 5% for each of the dedicated drops. So each of the three being Jelly, Lead Balloon, and Fireworks, dropped once for every 20 kills on average. I've seen it suggested that some legendaries from some bosses could be as high as like 20% or even as low as like 3%, but this is the only source I've seen that provides a reasonable amount of actual hard data, though it's limited to the one boss as an example. So we can use this to assume a baseline of 5% dedicated drop chance. With the knowledge there might be some variation, but this is definitely accurate for Splash Zone. That said, in those same 1,000 kills, they got 21 world drop pool legendaries, which is around a 2% drop rate on those, so 2% chance of getting any legendary that isn't a dedicated drop, 5% chance of each dedicated drop added onto each other, for a total of around a 17% legendary drop rate combined between them all. But you'll notice, out of 17%, only 2% of that is world drops, and that is exactly why understanding the dedicated drop system is so important, because the chances of getting a dedicated drop is so much higher than just getting a random world drop. But that does only apply to legendary items, not to all types of gear, and we will also be talking about purples and such today too. Next up then is talking about what difficulty you should play on, because the game outwardly tells you multiple times that higher difficulties come with higher loot drop quality, but it does not specify the amount or even what loot drop quality means in general. Here we have another player, Glitching Queen, who also killed Splash Zone around 1,000 times, but split between every difficulty in the game in an effort to work out exactly how the loot drop quality stat affects these things. Check out their video if you want the full results, but the relevant summary for the sake of what we're talking about right now is that they found the average legendary drop rate was nearly the same across all of the difficulties if you account for a little bit of variance. If anything, it leaned toward more legendaries on lower difficulties, but I would say it's more likely it's just the same legendary drop rate no matter what, and this is just the variance of a somewhat low sample size. If you average out all of the numbers they found across all the difficulties, you will notice an average drop rate of 16.9%. If that sounds familiar, it's because it is a hair's breadth off of the number we just talked about in relation to dedicated drops for Splash Zone, 5% chance for each of his 3 dedicated drops, adding up to 15%, then around a 2% drop rate on world drops. This would be a total of 17%. So this all lines up very neatly to say that expectations, our legendary drop rate is exactly the same between all difficulties, no matter what. So what does the loot drop quality stat actually mean then? Well, there are two things that we are currently leaning towards as a community. One, Purples. Higher drop quality means more purples instead of blues and greens that would otherwise drop. Purples have more modifiers than blues and greens, which means more chances at the good modifiers, the desirable modifiers. And if you are looking to find specific modifiers like the guaranteed crits after hitting someone with a Jakobs knife, more modifiers means more chances at getting the one specific modifier you actually want. So higher difficulties make those easier to farm, which makes sense. Purples, higher difficulty, better. Another thing players have considered is the quality of modifiers. Some modifiers are pretty rare, things like Spread Launcher on a Jakobs shotgun is a major example. Some people theorize that these are easier to find on higher difficulty, but I have seen nothing to actually back that up. I do fully believe that more purples is a thing though. The second one that I actually think I agree with is firmware. Some people were running under the assumption that some of the possible firmware would only exist in Ultimate Vault Hunter mode, but that does not seem to be the case. All firmware can be found on all difficulties, but people do seem to think that firmware drops more on higher difficulties, meaning it scales with loot drop quality. I have not yet seen any tests with good data on this, but this does feel correct at this very moment, at least for my own time playing on various difficulties too. I've also seen people suggest that weapons dropped on higher difficulty modes should have higher stats, like Mayhem mode weapons from the previous game, but this just is not true. I've seen weapons drop on low difficulties with equal or better stats than weapons that dropped on the highest difficulties. It's entirely just variants of weapon parts decided, including the ones that don't actually display as modifiers on the weapon, the hidden weapon parts, as you will always be on the mercy of RNG with that. All that to say, if you want specifically legendary items, and the modifier does not matter, play on easy mode because that will result in the most kills to time ratio for no loss on the legendary drop rate. If the modifier on that legendary does matter, like if you're trying to find a kickballer that needs to have a Jakobs part modifier as an example, you should consider upping the difficulty to whatever the limit your current build finds comfortable. If your desired legendary has a dedicated drop source, you want to farm that specific boss. Otherwise, if it doesn't have a dedicated source, just farm Splash Zone over and over as the most frequently killable boss enemy for the highest world drop chance per time spent ratio. If you want specific modifiers on your legendary, you're probably better off farming on higher difficulties, especially if you have a build that is strong enough that the actual kill time difference is negligible. But you never want to get to the point where the difficulty you play on is actually slowing you down properly. This only really applies if you are near one-shotting on any difficulty, otherwise your best bet is again just whichever one you kill the fastest on. That said, the rest of this discussion is going to be heavily around purples or just non-legendary gear in general. Purple gear does seem to increase in quantity with higher loot drop quality, and purples just have more opportunity to be strong than blue or green items, as purples can have more modifiers and more weapon parts as a result. So the more purples you can get, the better. And so if you want non-legendary equipment, you want to play on the highest difficulty that won't slow you down. As for what to farm, this does change things a little bit. Splash Zone is still an extremely efficient farm option even for purple items, but once you want purples instead of legendaries, you have another option, which are drill sites. Drill sites generally can give you near equal amounts of purple items per time spent than repeating Splash Zone runs can, at least without doing like cheesy co-op methods for Splash Zone, which do exist. But the big difference is that drill sites also give you a ton of experience, so if you want purples and you also want XP, then drill sites on the highest difficulty that doesn't slow you down would actually be the best option. But I would say that does come with a slight caveat that not being slowed down by a whole drill site is harder than not being slowed down by Splash Zone. So unless you are in an extremely powerful build to begin with, you probably still will be better off farming Splash Zone specifically, but especially for those that are tired of hearing they should kill that one guy over and over and over again, it is good to be aware that the drill sites are a very comparable option. And the best specific one is generally going to be the Pitted Stain drill site directly west of Idolator Saul's Fortress, just the largest, fastest one that you can do, and it has 3 bosses at the end which each drop their own pile of loot. And as well, for anyone wondering, there is no way to target specific purple weapons or modifiers in the game. There's not like a boss that drops a skewed numbers of Jakobs shotguns compared to another. No boss that specifically drops the same modifier on all equipment, nothing like that. If you aren't after a legendary, then you are going to have to deal with pure RNG. Outside of this, just a few things I want to discuss and clarify. Golden keys in the golden chest. General advice on this is to save it until you hit level 50, but the truth is at level 50 you will probably be hunting for specific legendaries instead of just random world drops, and the golden chest has no way of targeting specific items. So there is honestly nothing wrong with just using a key or two if you start to feel weak while leveling to try and pull a strong on-level legendary to carry you up for a little bit. Alternatively, you could save your golden keys for future characters that would start UVH UVH mode at level 30 with gray weapons on them, and you can use this to just get some immediate power right out of the gate. For class mods, I've seen a lot of people talking about the drop rate on these and how it feels skewed against you. Plenty of people swearing up and down that class mods for Vault Hunters, other than the one that you're playing, have higher drop rates, and seemingly that's just a coincidence. The creative director for the game itself confirmed that at least the intent of the developers is for there to be zero weighting on which class mods drop, and for it to be exactly even drop chance for a class mod from any of the 4 given Vault Hunters. But it is always possible there's a bug related to this, so they are going to look into this and make sure. That pretty much does it for today, then, everyone. Just a discussion about farming equipment in Borderlands 4, based around a lot of testing done by some players from the community, as well as just general knowledge about the game and my own time playing it pretty extensively as well. I hope you've all enjoyed this, and I hope it helps you out in getting the gear you want. And if you have any more tips that I did not mention here, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. Like if you liked the video, subscribe with the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, I'm the conductor of the poop train! Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.